It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It's Expresso right here on SABC3. It's Tuesday, and so you know that means Medical Tuesday. Dr. Darren Green is in the house. Now, the question we're asking is, do you often feel fatigued or have a pale skin complexion or feel lightheaded and dizzy without any explanation? Well, it could be an indication that you have problems with your blood, and more specifically, anemia, which is a condition where the blood contains too few red blood cells. So our resident doctor in the house, Dr. Darren Green, is here to unpack the situation. Dr. Darren Green, so good to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks,
You're
guys.
flexing in the break and just
showing us
ready.
the iron that's in our blood,
Popeye.
because that's one of the reasons, one of the causes for anemia. And I've experienced, you know, when I go and donate blood, they prick the finger and they tell me my iron is low, I can't donate.
Quick check. Yes, that's right.
So what is why do our blood need iron? Why does our blood need iron?
So without iron, the molecule that actually carries oxygen to all the body parts, including the brain, the heart, the muscles, etc., can't perform its function. The molecule in the blood, in the red blood cells, for example, have a protein called hemoglobin, which comprises heme, which is iron, and then the globin part's the protein part.
Yeah.
And oxygen then binds to that molecule and is then carried all over the body. So if you have too little red cells, you could be anemic. If you have too little iron to actually form red cells, you can be anemic. Or if you have other conditions that are actually killing your red cells too quickly, you can be anemic as well.
Wow. What happens if the body is completely depleted of iron? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, well, you die.
Oh, okay.
It's as simple as that. You know, if you can't carry oxygen throughout the body, that's what would happen. You know, normal blood, you can see the amount of red blood cells is abundant. The circulation of red cells, you can see the amount is much less concentrated.
Yeah.
And there are many different disease processes that lead to having a lower red cell count.
Okay. Well, doctor, I wouldn't have known I had, you know, a low iron count if I
Yeah.
didn't have my finger pricked to go donate blood. What are some of the other symptoms to look out for if you're potentially anemic?
Good question. I think a lot of people feel tired.
Yeah.
The problem with an iron deficiency or with anemia is that you only often experience some of these symptoms when it's quite far gone. In other words, a normal hemoglobin, for example, is above 12, 12.5, etc. But when it drops under 8, depending on your age, depending on your activity levels, you then manifest with the signs and symptoms, which are shortness of breath, fatigue, pale skin. You look whiter than white, almost a bit like Twilight. And then, of course, you can look at the nails. So the nail beds are often pale.
Yeah.
Your tongue is often pale as well. And then we look at the eyes as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to know, I don't know if this question is relevant, but is it true that you can also look at your stool? Is that also an indication of your iron?
Well, only if the cause of your iron shortage is a GIT bleed. In other words, if there's blood that's bleeding from an ulcer in the stomach that's acted upon by the acid in the stomach, that then turns like a tar color, black or ground coffee, and that's called melena. You'd then pick that up.
I remember when I was younger, my toes used to pull stiff a lot. You know, and you're like, and this is painful. Is that an iron deficiency?
You can get spasms, long term, but I think there were other causes. Those high heels, man.
It was not fun. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about what would cause someone to have a low iron count. Dr. Darren Green is in the house. If you have a question or comment or you are concerned about your current situation, please do give us a call. That number is 021 430 9881. Does your toes also do that thing?
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Well, we're back with our medical expert, Dr. Darren Green, and we're talking about anemia this morning. If you suffer from it, if you struggle with it, don't you want to give us a call on 021 430 9881. But before we went to you and Dr. Darren Green, I wanted to know what would cause someone to have a low iron count.
Yeah, so the most common cause of an iron shortage anemia are, unfortunately, in the female population, from having heavy menses. So if you have heavy menstruation that lasts either too many days or too heavy bleeding episodes, you lose a lot of blood and in that iron. Obviously, trauma and things like that, you lose a lot of blood too. And then pregnancy. In pregnancy, you also can have low iron, and that's because obviously the metabolic demand of iron in a growing fetus is so great. And then, of course, nutritional factors. So if you're not eating enough iron, you can be anemic. A lot of vegetarians, obviously, don't have anemia. They don't have to eat meat to have anemia. They get their iron from other sources, like your dark green leafy vegetables, for example. So that's quite important. And then there are conditions that like inherited conditions where you don't make enough red cells, like aplastic anemia. Also conditions that destroy your red cells too quickly. Things like sickle cell anemia, or if you have a malignancy or cancer, etc. So quite a vast array of causes, but the most common being your diet, your menses, and then pregnancy.
And then when is, because you mentioned now a couple of symptoms earlier, when is a good time to go and see your doctor?
Yeah. I just remembered one other one, a GIT bleed. So ulcers, gastritis, and ulcers is another big one. You should see your doctor when you're feeling tired or fatigued. You develop shortness of breath, for example, that can't be explained by being simply unfit, and obviously looking for a more definitive cause. When your skin pallor is pale, and people say to you, "You're looking a bit pale compared to what you normally look like," a simple finger prick hemoglobin test can already start the process, and then you get a proper full blood count, which looks at the more detailed components of the blood cells.
All right. Well, I wanted to know, are we getting all of the iron that we need from just the foods that we eat? I mean, you mentioned green leafy vegetables and meat as well, but do we need to take extra supplements to make sure that we're getting it? Because I know a lot of us aren't having, our diets aren't great, basically.
So you'd firstly have to know where you stand in terms of knowing what your levels are. So you get different forms of iron. We test the hemoglobin as a quick one. That's the finger prick, and that can give you an idea where you're at immediately. Then you'd obviously have to look and consider whether there's room for improvement in your diet or not. So depending on the cause of the anemia, you would then look at diet as a way of correcting it. Sometimes diet is simply not enough. If it's an ongoing problem, for example, where you're losing blood somewhere, you need to plug the hole. And that will help you then obviously correct the problem. But you do get chronic anemias as well associated with systemic illnesses like kidney disease, for example. And that's important to remember.
Thank you, Doctor. Well, we're going to have more with Dr. Darren Green, and perhaps, we're going to also talk about things to do if you're anemic and if you find yourself with a low iron count. But don't go anywhere. Our lines are open. That number's 021 430 9881.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. Welcome back. This is your Feel Good Breakfast Show, and we are still with Dr. Darren Green. Our lines are open as we talk about anemia. Are you perhaps anemic? We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a comment or a question, that number's 021 430 9881. Now, we currently have a caller online, Dr. Darren Green. Sumaya, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. What's your comment or question for Dr. Darren Green?
My son is 3 years old. He was diagnosed with anemia, but they gave him the medicine, the ferrous phosphorate or something, but every time I give it to him, he vomits it back up. You see, under any other method of iron supplement I can give him.
Thanks for the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Sumaya.
So he's been treated for an iron shortage or iron deficiency anemia with a supplemental ferrous sulfate. And that's like taking iron supplementation. You get tablets, you get syrup that's made. It often irritates the lining of the stomach because of the iron component. And you are advised to take it with orange juice, for example. You're advised to take it with your meals to minimize the gastric side effects. There is, however, hope. If the oral supplementation is not possible due to severe, reactions or adverse reactions to it, there is an intravenous form of iron supplementation that can be given, and that will be considered if they fail therapy on oral supplementation.
And she said her son is 3 years old.
3 years old, So the cause of his anemia obviously would be determined by his pediatrician, looking at the different categories that we mentioned earlier on.
Well, Sumaya, thank you so much for that call. I hope the doctor answered your question.
Good luck.
And Doctor, earlier we were talking about, signs to look out for if you've got anemia, what it's all about. But say I've got, an iron deficiency right now. What can I do to, fix it?
So I think deciding on supplementation is right at the top of the list. If you do decide to take supplementation, be aware of the signs to look out for in terms of the side effects. Know about constipation. Know about your number twos turning black. Don't get a fright when you see that.
Is that normal?
It's normal.
It's to be
You could have altered bowel motion due to that. And then obviously with that, some nausea and sometimes even abdominal cramps can occur. But there are things you can do to minimize that, as I said, combine it with orange juice, because vitamin C facilitates the absorption of iron from the gut. Vitamin C, folic acid, and B12.
Fantastic. Now, I know that today is also World Hemophilia Day.
Indeed.
What exactly is that, and what's the connection between hemophilia and anemia?
Sure. So hemophilia is a clotting problem.
Yeah.
It's an inherited condition where you don't have, depending on which hemophilia type you have, A, B, or C, certain blood clotting factors.
Okay.
So that can help you plug holes when you start bleeding, like a simple tooth extraction, for example.
Yes.
So hemophilia is a condition where you then bleed profusely
okay.
because of a lack of those clotting factors. Linked to anemia, because if you do bleed a lot and lose a lot of blood, you will become anemic. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dr. Darren Green, we're still going to have him for one more segment with us after this little break. But if you've got a comment or a question, give us a call. That number's 021 430 9881.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Time to connect with Dr. Darren Green one last time. Now, we've had a few callers call in this morning, and the question that a lot of people have been asking is with reference to dark circles under the eyes.
That's a
Is there
common
any
problem, hey?
connection to that and anemia,
Yeah,
being
you,
anemic?
you can have, because you're pale, generally in your pallor, you can see the darker circles a lot more easily, really. But the most common causes are lack of sleep, allergies, and genetic, in terms of looking at that. And also it depends on whether we're talking about on the top of the eyelids as well. Sometimes the capillaries have a genetic predisposition, obviously, for those color changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Doctor, we have a call on the line. We have Lucky from Durban. Good morning.
Hi, morning, ma'am. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Do you have a comment or a question for Dr. Green?
Yes, dear. I just want to know, everything that doctor has mentioned this morning on TV, I'm experiencing every single symptom.
Wow.
Now, the only extra symptom I'm experiencing is that I've missed my period for the last 3 months.
Okay.
And I wonder if it's also to anemia.
If it's all?
Can you repeat that last part again? You're worried it's?
I'm worried about that I've missed mine
Oh,
monthly.
Okay.
For the
for
last
the last
3
3
months.
months. All right.
Okay.
All right, so
Yes.
first things first, one would look, obviously, and make sure that you're not pregnant if you've missed your normal menstruation. And that's
I'm
important.
definitely not. I've been to the doctor. I've had a scan done as well.
Okay.
Fantastic. So, I mean, important then, obviously, to go for the full blood count test, which would look then at the different components, the red cell count, the hemoglobin count, and so on, especially if you are feeling fatigued, tired, dizzy at times. There are many causes for some of those symptoms that are not related to anemia as well. So one would look at things like your blood pressure, your sugar, your iron levels, etc., and have a decent physical examination first. And certainly, if you're feeling those symptoms, I'd suggest you see your practitioner.
Okay. Thank you for that call, Lucky. Now, Doctor, we've spoke about, what to do if you now find yourself anemic, but is it possible for you to, have too much? Like if you
overload.
Overload of
Yes,
iron?
you can get overload of iron. Now, that's the specific name is hemochromatosis.
Okay.
So there's a genetic condition where if you have the gene from both parents, you actually can store too much iron. And the different forms of iron floating around in the body, you get ferritin, which we measure as a measure of your iron stores, an indirect measure, and then transferrin. And that's another protein that carries the iron to the liver, to the spleen, and to the bone marrow. And we can measure both of those substances to give us an idea what the cause of your iron shortage is.
Very quickly, what are some of the healthy lifestyle adaptations we can make to make sure that we regulate our iron levels?
Yeah, I think so. A lot more green, dark green leafy vegetables.
Okay.
Get that into your diet. If you are eating meat, obviously look at the amount of meat you're eating. And then, of course, obviously looking at your family history.
Yes.
If you have heavy menses, do something about them. Don't just leave it and get weaker and more tired and more dizzy over time.
Yes.
So if there's a source of you losing blood anywhere in your body, and if you see dark black stools, go and ask your doctor about it.
Okay. Well, Dr. Darren Green, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And
Thank
to
you.
each and every caller that called, thank you so much for participating. We'll be back with the doctor again next week.